this day, in some places in the world, if you kill somebody, the government will kill you back as punishment. But throughout history, there's been way worse punishments, such as torture. So today, let's go over the top 5 most inhumane torture methods in all of history. Thanks for tuning in to Informal History. My name's Adam, and I think that a lot of people find torture interesting because it's one of those things you see in movies, you know it's happened, and you know that it still happens even in the US, called enhanced interrogation. We're just not supposed to talk about it. So today let's go over 5 historical ones, and a lot of these are also execution methods, but we're really focusing on torture. And let's start with one that is probably still going on today, even though the US denies it, and that is sound torture. Now, sound torture is more of a modern one because, well, in the 1700s, you didn't have loudspeakers, although you could do it with other methods. So this is one of the more modern ones we'll talk about today. Basically, sound torture has many different ways that this can be gone about. You can lock somebody in a cell or a room or some sort of confinement and then blast loud music in there. We've seen this in movies, we've seen this in Ozark pretty recently. So you're blasting usually heavy metal. And this happens a lot to POWs, prisoners of war. Now, in the War on Terror, this has been used where we have people from the Middle East who don't speak English, who have never heard heavy metal. They're thrown into a chamber, basically. And then we play things like Eminem or Enter Sandman or I don't know if we've ever used Baby Shark, but to me that would probably be the worst one you could do. And this has been studied for a decent amount of time, and usually after about 24 hours, especially if it's constant, your brain is going to start to really break down. You're going to get really anxious, and usually you are in solitary confinement when this happens too. And there's been a few instances of this. For example, in 1989, the US government invaded Panama. And Noriega, the ruler of Panama, fled and took refuge in an embassy. This was in 1989. This is in December. At this point, the US troops immediately swarm this embassy, surround it completely. He can't go anywhere. And they start blasting in music nonstop. They're using Van Halen's Panama, which is super loud and nonstop, constantly playing on a loop, which is ironic, but also I imagine after a little while, you'd probably get pretty sick of that. And then they start blasting things like the Howard Stern show. So after a while, Noriega, about 2 weeks, he comes out and surrenders. Let's go to something a little bit more gruesome. Number 4, rat torture. Now, there's a lot of various ways that this has been done, and it's been done all around the world. It started before we have records, basically, where there's just drawings of people doing stuff like this. And then there's guys like Richard Kuklinski, the Iceman, who was a rather recent serial killer, who said he used to do a version of this. Basically, rat torture, a few different ways. You can lock somebody in a cell with rats, and the rats eventually will starve and just eat this person alive. That's one way, probably the most primitive, easy way to do it. And then there's the more cinematic way, which we've seen in different movies before, where you take a rat, you put it on someone's bare stomach or bare chest, and then you take a metal bowl, you put it on top of that rat so that the rat has nowhere to go, and then you start to heat up the metal bowl. Now, obviously, the rat is going to completely freak out, have a huge meltdown, and it's going to try to escape. Can't escape through metal, but it's pretty easy for rats to go through human flesh. I don't know which is worse, being tied up so you're immobilized in a room full of rats and you can't really do anything but just watch them eat you, or be pinned down on a table and have a rat being burrowed through you. Argentina has been known to use the rectoscope, which is exactly what you think it is. I don't think I really need to explain this. The rectoscope. Like the gerbil in a tube, but with a rat. And it's forced and then can't leave. Yeah. Number 3, let's get a little mythological here, the Brazen Bull. Now, there are accounts that this was an actual thing, but of course this is used in mythology a lot too. And basically what this is, more or less, is a bull made completely out of bronze. Some people call it the bronze bull, and which is metal. Metal conducts heat very well. I think you see where I'm going with this. It's completely bronze, and it has a door in the side where you'd put somebody inside of. And then it has acoustic apparatuses inside of it to change the tone of someone's voice. So let's suppose that you lit a fire underneath this bronze bull. Well, this bronze bull is going to heat up pretty quickly, and it's going to start searing anything inside it. And if it's a human, they're probably going to scream. And the acoustics inside are made to make those screams sound like a bull bellowing. All you can do is just sit there and move around, but everywhere around you is scalding hot. It's basically like having two frying pans stuck on top of each other and you're in the middle. And by the way, when you're screaming, there's an audience all the way around that's listening to your screams in the tone of a bull. Horrific. Number 2, a crowd favorite all around the world for many years, the breaking wheel. Now this has many different ways to go about it, different names. The ones that are most primitive probably are basically a wagon wheel. Imagine a wagon wheel that you'd use for a literal wagon. And what happens is you have as many spokes as necessary to make it as heavy as possible. Sometimes you have spikes around it, or it has an iron rim, or has a blade attached to it. But either way, a person could be chained to the floor upright, usually to a wall or a stake or something like that. And then the executioner, or torturer, if it's not going to be made for an execution, will take the wheel, which is very heavy, and start at the feet and start to drop this wheel on the person's legs all the way up. So you're breaking all of your toes, your feet, your shins, your femurs, maybe your hips. They'll break your hands, your wrists, your arms, and then eventually they'll start to break your shoulders. They'll go after your ribs, and then ultimately maybe your neck if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, then what they do is they take this wagon wheel, and because your body is very moldable, let's say, like a spaghetti noodle, they'll intertwine your broken limbs, which is very painful, by the way. And then they'll put this kind of like a crucifixion with flair, I like to think of it. So they put this wheel on top of a spike or a stake for everyone to see. And then they leave you there. Maybe you're dead, maybe you're not. Usually you're gonna die within the first few hours. But there are accounts of a man living 9 days, conscious for 9 days, and this person was kept alive deliberately to make the end of his life very long, very slow, very painful. And of course, as this is happening, you can't protect yourself at all. All your limbs are broken, you can barely breathe, and there are vultures and other varmints taking pieces of you as you're alive, and after you're dead, you are left there as a reminder not to do what you did. If you are a person who committed assaults in the way that you know what I'm talking about, but you can't say on YouTube, or otherwise you get demonetized. If you murder somebody, if you're a traitor, if you rob somebody, this is how you might be subject to the breaking wheel. There are other accounts where you just tied to the wagon wheel and then they take hammers to your joints and your limbs. There's other accounts where you're tied to it, so basically your back is a semicircle and then they roll the wheel down a hill. No matter what, it's just not a fun time, not a good way to go. Oh, and by the way, the last time this has been known to happen was in 1841 in Prussia. So although this has a long history, it's not that long ago that this was still being done. And number 1, possibly the most famous, the rack. Now this was used in the Roman Empire. This was used to torture early Christians when that was a brand new thing. And this was used all the way up until the 20th century in Mao, China. So this is something that got a lot of miles for the idea. More or less, there's a lot of ways that this could be done. In Russia, their favorite way to do it was to basically string you up by your arms, either up like this or behind your back, so it dislocated your shoulders pretty easily. They would tie your ankles together, put a big log between them, and then start to put weight on the log. So you're being stretched out using gravity and force. Sometimes it's more of like a bed where it's laid down, made of metal or wood, and then your hands and your ankles are bound. So more or less you're stretched up, and then using wheels and levers, you're stretched slowly. Usually this is a form of torture to get something out of you. The torturers are trying to get a name out of you, or an idea, or a place where something is hidden. And more or less, it's very, very painful. And what happens ultimately is your joints just come apart. And if you don't die from this, which is usually the case, you're gonna be brought somewhere to be either burned or just left there. And generally, if none of your limbs work, especially in ancient times, you're probably not gonna survive very long. Overall, it's just a really bad way to go, because at the end of it, if they let you go, you still can't go anywhere. All of your joints are dislocated, and who's gonna put them back in? And even if they do get put back in, who's gonna be able to do all of them, and who's gonna heal properly, especially without the advent of modern medicine? Best of luck. Gonna be a slow one for you. So those are the top 5 most inhumane torture methods in history. So let me know in the comment section below, what ones do you think are even more humane than this? And of course, if you want to see different videos like this, let me know your ideas in the comment section below. I do videos every weekend, so I'll see you in the next one.